Welcome to Swy Files. I'm Swy. Imagine a world where, in the remote forests, amidst snow-covered mountain ranges, or even within seemingly peaceful wilderness areas, people mysteriously vanish. No trace, no clues, just a deadly silence and questions that are never answered. These aren't science fiction stories, but the dark reality that David Paulides has delved into with his renowned series Missing 411. And it all started with a strange tale from national park rangers. David Paulides, a former police officer, had no idea that his life would be drawn into a series of supernatural mysteries when national park rangers came to him seeking help. They spoke of unexplained disappearances in the national forest areas where they worked. These incidents had baffled them for years, with no clear answers. The disappearances were so bizarre they were almost unbelievable. People vanished in areas where they had just been seen, or they were found in places that had already been searched extensively, yet with no prior evidence of their presence. Paulides began his investigation with skepticism. Initially, he thought these were just random accidents that could be explained by natural causes. But as he dug deeper, a terrifying pattern began to emerge. Thousands of disappearances with eerie similarities. Sudden changes in weather when someone went missing, police dogs unable to follow any scent, and in many cases, no trace at all, indicating that the missing person had ever been there. With the careful precision of a veteran investigator, Paulides started mapping out clusters of disappearances, leading to a horrifying discovery. The second largest disappearance cluster in the world was located in Greater Vancouver, Canada. This vast area, with its untamed wilderness and the mysterious Fraser River running through it, has become a hotspot for unexplained vanishings. Why do people disappear near water? Why do these regions hold such unfathomable mysteries? Paulides didn't stop at Canada. He expanded his investigation to other countries, and similar stories began to surface. But nowhere was as strange or as terrifying as Canada, where these disappearances occurred not only in the wild, but even in cities close to everyday life. What is happening in places we assume are safe? By identifying the similarities, Paulides uncovered a chilling truth. The disappearances in Canada are not just accidents or isolated incidents. There is an invisible force, something beyond the explanation of science and ordinary logic. Disappearances near water, bizarre storms that emerge immediately after someone vanishes, and the desperation of families who never see their loved ones again. All of this forms a dark and enigmatic picture. These elements not only send shivers down your spine, but also raise endless unanswered questions. Why do the missing leave no trace? Why can't rescue teams find them, even when they vanish in small, easily searchable areas? And why do supernatural phenomena, like strange lights in the sky, coincide with these disappearances? The answers might lie somewhere in the upcoming chapters of this eerie investigation. And once a reader steps into this world, they won't be able to stop until every secret is unveiled, if any secrets are ever revealed. After uncovering the mysteries of disappearances in the wilderness of the United States, David Paulides turned his attention northward, to Canada, where the wildlands seem even more vast and untouched by human presence. Canada is not only a cold and expansive country, but also a place harboring a series of disappearances that even the most seasoned investigators cannot explain. Within these immense stretches of land, Paulides encountered clusters of disappearances that forced him to rethink every theory he had previously held. The Greater Vancouver area quickly became the focal point of his investigation, but the story didn't stop there. Across the Canadian territory, from the forests of British Columbia to the frozen plains of Manitoba, people seemed to be disappearing without a trace. Greater Vancouver, with its majestic mountain ranges and intricate network of rivers and lakes, became one of the largest disappearance hotspots David Paulides had ever encountered in his entire investigative career. What makes this region so unique? With mountains that are not particularly high, about 4,000 to 5,000 feet, and dense forests covering the area, Vancouver shouldn't be a place where people vanish without leaving any evidence. Yet mysteriously, this land has witnessed dozens of disappearances, sharing the same unsettling pattern. They happen near water, and often during unusual weather conditions. Throughout his investigation, Paulides discovered that water seems to be a common factor in these disappearances in Vancouver. The Fraser River, a massive river flowing through the city, along with a series of lakes stretching out from the northern areas, creates a wilderness environment that is difficult to predict. These mysterious disappearances haven't only taken place in remote areas, but also close to residential neighborhoods, where one would expect it impossible for someone to vanish unnoticed. Imagine a group of people on a hiking trip near Vancouver, walking along clearly marked trails. Suddenly, one of them realizes there is no one behind them. They turn back to look, but in just a few seconds, their friend has completely disappeared. No tracks, no strange sounds, only silence and growing panic. These disappearances not only shocked the local community, but also left rescue experts and investigators utterly baffled. Paulides recounts one particularly striking case he studied in this region. Ray Salmon, an experienced hunter, disappeared while hunting near a large lake not far from Vancouver. When the police and his family began searching for him, they found strange traces near the lake shore. Ray's clothes were discovered right by the water, yet there were no signs of a wild animal attack. Even more bizarre, Ray never left camp without his hunting dogs. Why would he leave them behind and venture out alone? As the search continued, the police decided to call in a SWAT team, a highly unusual and suspicious move for a seemingly ordinary missing person case. But why would a SWAT team be involved in a harmless search? What prompted the authorities to act with such intensity? As Paulides delved deeper into the disappearance clusters in Vancouver, he unearthed similar stories where victims vanished near water in areas that had been thoroughly searched before, leaving behind only clothes or personal items, yet their bodies were never found. Water here is not just a natural element, it seems to be the key to a much larger mystery. Leaving Vancouver, Paulides continued his investigation into Manitoba, where the disappearance stories became even more chilling. The vast, frozen plains with little cover or shelter made disappearances nearly impossible. How could someone vanish in the middle of a flat field where there were no forests to hide in? Paulides recounts one of the strangest cases. Betty Wolfram, a 4-year-old girl who disappeared in May 1934 in Moosehorn, Manitoba. In an open plain with only a few fields and ponds, Betty was placed in a stroller outside the house while her father worked in a nearby field. In just a moment, when he turned his back, he realized that Betty had mysteriously vanished, leaving no trace. Neither the family nor the police could comprehend how a child could disappear in such an open space without anyone seeing or hearing anything. In the days following, heavy rain made the search even more difficult. But on the 5th day, Betty was unexpectedly found in a marsh area a few miles from where she had disappeared. Strangely, she showed no signs of dehydration, no insect bites, and even her clothes remained clean after days spent in the wild. How could a 4-year-old survive in such harsh conditions? And who had taken care of her during the time she was missing? These questions continued to haunt Paulides as he investigated more disappearances in Manitoba. Florence Spence, a 3-year-old girl, also disappeared in a swampy area not far from where Betty had gone missing. After 7 days of searching, she was found by a farmer who claimed he had dreamed of Florence and located her in the exact spot from his dream. What was this strange coincidence? Was something supernatural happening in this area? The mountains of British Columbia, with their rugged terrain and dense forests, resemble a horror landscape when it comes to disappearances. Paulides discovered a series of inexplicable disappearances on a mountain just a few miles from Vancouver. Astonishingly, in an area only a few square miles wide, as many as 6 people vanished without a trace. The disappearance clusters in British Columbia include not only adults but also children. In many cases, the victims were found in bizarre conditions. Clothes were stripped off or worn backward, and shoes were left behind for no clear reason. Some bodies were not even found for years, despite the area being thoroughly searched. Paulides recounts the story of Jack Pike, a 5-year-old boy who disappeared while picking wild berries with his family in a rural area near St. Norbert. The family heard Jack scream, but by the time they rushed over, the boy had completely vanished. After 4 days of searching, Jack was found unconscious under a bush on the opposite bank of a large river. with no sign indicating he had crossed the water. The mystery of British Columbia continues with disappearances in areas such as Mount Seymour and Vancouver Island, where many people have vanished with no one able to explain why. What is truly happening in these places? Could it be supernatural forces, intervention from extraterrestrial beings, or simply natural phenomena that humans have yet to understand? While investigating the disappearance clusters, Paulides couldn't overlook the strange commonalities among them. Victims often vanished near water, the weather suddenly changed when they disappeared, and there were cases where their tracks abruptly vanished in midair. Tales of strange lights, unexplained sounds, and mysterious phenomena surrounding the disappearances only added to the chilling nature of the story. The journey of discovery had just begun. One of the most terrifying and unsettling aspects of the disappearances in Canada is the cases where victims returned. Florence Spence is a prime example. She was found after 7 days of being missing in an area that had already been searched multiple times. Who took care of her during that time? And what truly happened in the minds of these victims when they couldn't explain what they had gone through? Some victims, upon their return, had no memory of their disappearance. They couldn't explain why they ended up in places they could not have reached on their own. Did they experience a supernatural phenomenon that erased their memories? These memory gaps only heightened the eeriness, making it seem as if the victims had ventured into another dimension and only returned when allowed. The story of Geraldine Huggins serves as a haunting example of this. The 5-year-old girl was found deep in a forest, miles from where she had disappeared, with no sign indicating that she had traveled such a long distance. Who took her there? And what kept her alive for days in the wilderness? The disappearance and reappearance of these victims seemed like a cruel game played by an invisible entity, a force that leaves traces only when it chooses. After compiling a series of disappearances from across Canada's vast lands, a chilling picture began to emerge. Canada is not just a wild and untamed land, but a place where invisible traps of nature lie in wait, pulling people in, never to return. Could these be unexplored natural phenomena, or is there a supernatural force existing alongside our world? In Canada's disappearance zones, from the plains of Manitoba to the foggy mountains of British Columbia, people don't just physically disappear. They seem to vanish from the very timeline and space we know. Each story is a piece of a larger puzzle, a puzzle that David Paulides has yet to complete, a mystery that no one, not even the most experienced investigators, dares to confront directly. But one thing is certain, these disappearances are not random. Something is quietly watching, waiting. And Canada, with its mysterious forests and lakes, is where this force is most active. When we stare into the void, could something be staring back at us? Each disappearance is not simply the physical vanishing of a person, but behind it lies a series of chilling, unexplainable events. Every victim, every story holds mysteries that leave one shivering at the thought of some unseen force. Canada, with its vast and untamed landscapes, seems to have become a deadly land, where life disappears in mere moments, and an invisible darkness engulfs everything. On a cold morning amidst the dense forests of British Columbia, Ray Salmon prepared for a short hunting trip near Fraser Lake, an area he was familiar with. The forest surrounding the lake always gave Ray a sense of both invitation and danger. Yet, he trusted his survival skills and decided to go, bringing along his loyal hunting dog, a companion he had never left behind on any of his trips. The weather seemed favorable that day, but according to local residents, there was something unusual in the air. The wind whistling through the trees sounded different, and the silence of the forest made it feel as if an unseen entity was lurking somewhere. Ray left camp with plans to hunt for a few hours, but he never returned. The first few hours passed in silence, and no one thought the situation would take such a horrifying turn. But when Ray's hunting dog returned to camp alone, displaying unusual panic, people began to sense that something terrifying had happened. When Ray's family and friends realized he was missing, they immediately summoned a rescue team. Initially, everyone believed Ray might have gotten lost or had an accident in the forest. However, the deeper they searched around Fraser Lake, the stranger and harder it became to explain the clues. What made people shudder the most was when the rescue team found Ray's clothes neatly folded by the lakeshore, as if someone or something had deliberately arranged them. Ray's clothes and gear were found intact, but there was no sign of him. The rescue dogs couldn't pick up any scent trail, even though he had only been missing for a few hours. The most shocking and unexpected twist came when the police summoned a SWAT team to join the search. Why would a SWAT team be needed for a simple missing person case? Did they know something they weren't revealing? The presence of a SWAT team in such a remote forest left locals deeply unsettled and filled with dread. Rumors began to spread about the presence of something beyond control, a supernatural force or invisible entity that was watching and capturing anyone who dared venture into the deep woods. Throughout the search, several members of the rescue team reported feeling watched. Some even heard strange sounds coming from deep within the forest, like footsteps echoing through the treetops. But whenever they approached, everything went eerily silent, leaving behind a haunting stillness. The forest was no longer the peaceful place Ray had known. It had become a dangerous, deadly trap. A week after the disappearance, the rescue team discovered strange marks along the lakeshore. They weren't human or animal footprints, but odd shapes, as if the ground had been dragged or disturbed by some unknown force. These tracks led from the lake to a marshy area and then mysteriously vanished. There were no other clues, no sign of a struggle or encounter with wildlife. Ray's family, in their despair, requested a report from the authorities, but all they received was a heavily redacted file, leaving them even more confused. The silence from the police only deepened the fear and mystery surrounding Ray's disappearance. Something had happened, but no one dared to speak the truth. The forest where Ray disappeared wasn't just an ordinary wildland. Locals described the Fraser Lake area as having an otherworldly atmosphere, as if it belonged to a different realm, a place where the laws of nature didn't fully apply. Some believed Ray had been pulled into another dimension, where spirits or supernatural entities resided. Hunters who ventured into the area after Ray's disappearance recounted hearing strange sounds in the forest at night, soft whispers carried on the wind. They felt the gaze of something unseen, though they couldn't spot anything. Some even claimed to see odd lights appearing near the lake at night, only to vanish like ghosts in the woods. Ray Salmon's disappearance remains an unsolved mystery. No one knows what truly happened to him, and the presence of the SWAT team, along with the redacted documents, only made everything more unclear. Ray left no trace, and to this day the forest around Fraser Lake remains a place that no one dares enter unless absolutely necessary. Disappearances in Canada, like Ray's case, aren't just isolated events. They hint at a larger mystery, an invisible force that exists within the wild forests, pulling its victims into another dimension that we cannot yet comprehend. Is Ray Salmon truly dead? Or was he taken by a supernatural force still waiting for more curious souls to step into Fraser Lake's wilderness? The answer still awaits in the shadows of the forest. On May 15, 1934, in the remote wilderness of Moosehorn, Manitoba, a disappearance sent the small community into panic. Betty Wolfram, a 4-year-old girl, vanished without a trace. Betty's story was not just a typical missing person case. It held chilling details that hinted at an invisible force quietly manipulating the lives of those living amid this wild nature. That morning, Carl Wolfram, Betty's father, placed her in a small stroller outside the family's farmhouse as he worked in the adjacent field. He periodically glanced back at his daughter, who was peacefully napping. The area around the farm was serene, with no signs of the terror that was about to unfold. But in a fleeting moment, when Carl turned around, the stroller was empty. Betty had vanished. Fear set in quickly. Carl immediately ran around the area, calling his daughter's name, hoping she had wandered nearby. But no, Betty had disappeared without a trace. This could not have happened in such an open space, where everything was visible. The family and local townspeople quickly joined the search, but no one could find any clues. The empty stroller became the symbol of a dark mystery slowly unraveling. Soon after Betty disappeared, it began to pour. Heavy rain fell for hours, erasing any tracks she might have left behind. The fields became muddy, and the wild lands around the farm grew foggy under the rain. the search continued relentlessly, but hope began to fade. The sudden change in weather during disappearances was a strange pattern often noted in David Paulides' investigations. It was as if nature itself was hiding the dark truth behind Betty's disappearance. Over the next 4 days, the search expanded, but all efforts were fruitless. The flat terrain of the area made it incredibly hard to believe someone could vanish without leaving any trace. People started to ask questions. Could something supernatural be happening? Had an invisible entity taken Betty, unseen by anyone? When all hope seemed lost, on the 5th day, a strange miracle occurred. A farmer named Ray Rosen, while walking around a nearby swamp, unexpectedly found Betty, wandering in a dazed state. The strangest thing was that Betty wasn't hurt, showed no signs of dehydration, and her clothes were still clean, an impossibility given that she had been missing in harsh weather conditions for 4 days. Who had taken care of her during this time? This question sent chills down everyone's spine. There were no signs that she had survived on her own in the cold swamp. Betty couldn't recall what had happened, and she only shivered silently when her mother asked her about the incident. A local doctor examined Betty after her recovery and issued a stunning report. Betty wasn't dehydrated, hadn't been bitten by insects, and he confirmed she had been fed and cared for during the time she was missing. This left everyone in shock. Who or what had sheltered and nourished Betty during her disappearance? Notably, her clothes were completely dry, despite it having rained heavily the night before. The strangeness of Betty's disappearance didn't end there. Ray Rosen, the farmer who found her, said that when he entered the swamp to look for her, he felt as though an invisible force was watching and guiding him. He even admitted that he doubted he would return safely after stepping into that area. What had truly happened in the swamp? There were no signs of any living creature in the area. Yet it was clear Betty had been cared for by an unseen force. All the clues pointed to an eerie mystery that defied explanation. It seemed Ray Rosen knew more than he was letting on. When interviewed, he refused to reveal details about his feelings while finding Betty, but the anxious look in his eyes and his silence led many to believe that he had encountered something beyond human understanding. Had he been guided by someone or something to find Betty? Could it be that a supernatural entity was controlling his actions? Betty Wolfram's disappearance left a series of unanswered questions. Who had taken her? Why was she unharmed after 4 days in harsh conditions? What had happened in the swamp that both Ray Rosen and the searchers felt an invisible force? The truth behind Betty Wolfram's disappearance remains hidden, but one thing is certain: this was no ordinary case. What had happened to her was part of a larger mystery, one that no one, to this day, has been able to explain. Was it nature itself, or some invisible entity silently orchestrating and controlling these disappearances? Betty's disappearance is just one of many strange cases David Paulides has documented, and this story is only the beginning of a series of terrifying events we have yet to uncover. In the wild and eerie rural landscape of Manitoba, there is a story that, even now, remains unforgettable to those who have heard it. It is the tale of Florence Spence, a 3-year-old girl who mysteriously disappeared one afternoon in May. But what makes this story truly terrifying is not only Florence's sudden vanishing, but also the strange dreams, like guidance from an unseen force, that led the villagers to the place where she was found. Was this a strange miracle, or the deadly trick of an invisible entity? It was a quiet afternoon in the remote countryside of Manitoba. Florence Spence was playing in the yard while her parents worked on the farm. The area was unremarkable, just vast barley fields and a few scattered houses. The Spence family never imagined that the peace of their day would be shattered in an instant by a disappearance they could not explain. When her parents came out to check on the farm work, they noticed that Florence had completely disappeared. Just moments before, she had been playing in the yard, but now she was nowhere to be found. An eerie silence settled over the farm, as if Florence had never been there at all. Her family and neighbors immediately began searching, but all efforts were in vain. There were no footprints, no sounds, and no signs of where she might have gone. For the next 7 days, the area around the farm became a maze of desperate calls and unanswered pleas. Search teams were summoned, and dozens of people scoured the land from the fields to the nearby swamps. No one could find a single trace of Florence's existence. This was impossible, as the area where she had disappeared was a wide, open plain with no dense forests to hide in or remote places to vanish into. By the 7th day of the search, all hope seemed lost. Rain poured down throughout the night as if nature itself was trying to conceal something. But then, something strange happened. Blair, a farmer who lived nearby, began to have strange dreams. In these dreams, he found himself walking through a dense forest where dim light filtered through the trees. Blair vividly remembered that he was searching for something important. And when he reached a large rock, he saw Florence lying motionless between two stones. Blair woke up feeling uneasy, yet filled with determination. His dream had felt too real. Every detail of the location and the surroundings was so vivid that he couldn't ignore it. He decided to go out and check the area he had seen in his dream. Although he wasn't sure if the place was real, a powerful instinct guided him forward. Blair left his house early in the morning, following the path he had seen in his dream, each step feeling as if driven by an invisible force. He sensed a presence watching him, as though the forest was whispering with every gust of wind. The atmosphere around him grew heavy and eerie, yet Blair continued forward. Then, just as in his dream, he found two large rocks lying side by side in a small swampy area. As Blair approached, his heart pounded. In the dim morning light, between the two rocks, Florence Spence lay motionless, her face pale but still faintly breathing. Astonishingly, she was alive, though in a semi-conscious state with no visible signs of having endured the harsh weather conditions or any injury. Florence could not explain what had happened to her. She remembered nothing about her time missing, where she had been, or what she had done over the past 7 days. What was even more terrifying was that she showed no signs of insect bites or dehydration, something impossible given the harsh environment and the amount of time she had been exposed to the elements. How could she have survived without any care? Who or what had protected her during that time? When doctors examined Florence, they couldn't find any physical abnormalities. Her body was completely normal, but her mind seemed to be clouded by something. Florence couldn't answer any questions about where she had been or who might have helped her. What had happened during those 7 days? Who or what had guided Blair to Florence's location in his dream? Had a supernatural force abducted her, only to decide to return her in such a mysterious condition? Had Florence wandered into another dimension, where time and reality operated under rules different from those of the world we know? Locals began to spread rumors that Florence had encountered an invisible entity, perhaps the spirit of the forest or some other supernatural force that had held her captive for 7 days. They believed that Blair had been guided by those very spirits, tasked with rescuing Florence as part of an unfathomable game that no one could fully understand. Those who had participated in the search shared that they had also felt a strange presence in the forest during the dark nights. Some heard whispers in the wind, as if someone was speaking, though they couldn't pinpoint where the voice came from. A few even claimed to have seen faint lights flickering in the woods during the final nights of the search, but when they approached, the lights vanished instantly. The story of Florence Spence is one of the most bizarre disappearances ever recorded in Manitoba. No one could explain what happened to her during those 7 missing days, nor could they understand how Blair was able to find her through a dream. The unanswered questions still linger in the air, serving as a chilling reminder that there are things in this world that humans may never fully comprehend. Did the forest itself abduct Florence, or had she stumbled into a parallel dimension where time and space follow their own rules? And did Blair truly find her, or was he merely a pawn in a deadly supernatural game, controlled by a force we have yet to understand? These mysteries will forever remain in the shadows, and perhaps we should never try to uncover them. When the story of Jack Pike, a 5-year-old boy who disappeared in the vast wilderness of British Columbia, spread, those who heard it could not hide their fear. It wasn't just an ordinary missing person case, but one filled with eerie and perplexing details, leading everyone to ask, what in that forest took Jack? and what caused him to let out a final terrified scream before vanishing. That day, the sky was clear, and a gentle breeze rustled through the forest surrounding the Red River. The Pike family decided to go for a picnic and pick wild berries in the woods, an activity they had done many times before without issue. Jack Pike, an energetic boy, loved to run ahead to explore new places, but his parents always kept a watchful eye on him. There was no sign that tragedy was lurking nearby. Jack ran ahead, laughing as he found ripe berries. His parents turned their backs for only a few minutes, chatting and preparing lunch. But in that brief moment, a sudden scream pierced the air, coming from Jack's direction. It was a scream filled with fear and desperation, as if the boy had seen something horrifying. The Pike family rushed to where Jack had been, but all they found was a chilling silence. Jack had vanished. His family and friends immediately called the police, and within hours, a large search party was formed. They divided into small groups, scouring the surrounding forest, calling Jack's name, but there was no trace of him. This left everyone with an unsettling fear, because the area where Jack had disappeared was not a dense, hard-to-search forest. Jack seemed to have vanished into thin air after his final scream. Even more perplexing, search dogs, trained to track missing persons, couldn't pick up any scent of Jack. His scent had completely disappeared, as if he had been pulled into another dimension, out of reach of humans and even animals with the sharpest sense of smell. As the search continued, the atmosphere became more oppressive and strange. Members of the search team reported feeling as if an unseen presence was watching them from the shadows of the thick trees. Whispers floated on the wind, but when they turned to find the source, everything fell eerily silent, leaving only a haunting quiet. 4 days had passed since Jack's disappearance, and no one in the search party could understand why the boy had left no trace. Everyone felt a growing sense of hopelessness, as if they were searching for something that didn't belong to this world. Cold rain began to fall, and the shadows of the forest grew more menacing with every hour. Every corner of the forest had been explored, yet Jack was still missing, as if he had never existed. On the 4th day, hope had almost completely vanished. But then, a shocking discovery was made. Jack Pike was found, not in the forest, but on the opposite bank of the Red River, miles away from where he had disappeared. What stunned everyone was that Jack showed no signs of having crossed the river. His clothes were completely dry, with no dirt or weeds clinging to them. How had the boy crossed the river without getting wet? When found, Jack was in a semi-conscious state, unable to speak or answer any questions. He couldn't remember anything about what had happened, where he had gone, or why he had ended up on the opposite bank of the river. His mind seemed wiped clean, as if the memories of the terrifying event had been erased by an invisible force. What had happened to Jack? Even stranger, Jack showed no signs of hunger or dehydration, which was entirely unreasonable given that he had been missing for 4 days in harsh conditions. Locals began to ask, had something taken Jack, something that had held him for a time, only to release him when everything was ready? What had caused Jack to scream in terror before disappearing? The unanswered questions surrounding Jack's disappearance fueled wild speculation. Some searchers shared that at night, as they camped near the riverbank, they had seen strange lights flickering in the forest, as if someone were carrying torches. But when they moved closer, the lights vanished into the air. Strange noises also echoed through the nights during the final days of the search. Some heard soft footsteps, as though someone or something was moving through the bushes. But when they shone their flashlights in that direction, there was no one there. What was watching them? Had an unseen force led Jack into the darkness and then decided to release him? To this day, Jack Pike's disappearance remains a major unsolved mystery. How could the boy have crossed the river without getting wet? What had caused Jack to scream in terror before vanishing? Who or what had held him for 4 days, only to return him in a state of complete amnesia? Perhaps there's an invisible entity in that forest, something no one can see, but that is always present. Perhaps that's why the area has become a dark mystery, where unexplained disappearances continue to occur. The unanswered questions remain, and maybe we should never try to investigate too deeply. Jack Pike returned, but the truth of what happened to him during those missing days will remain a shadowy mystery, haunting those who witnessed it for years to come. Jack Pike's disappearance wasn't just a horrifying event for his family, but left a chilling mark on the memories of all who heard about it. That forest is no longer a place of peace, and perhaps it never was. On a cold autumn night in 1967, in a small remote village in northern British Columbia, Geraldine Huggins, a 5-year-old girl, mysteriously disappeared right before her family's eyes. That evening, Geraldine and her family were having a small picnic outside their log cabin, nestled next to a dense forest. Everything was peaceful. The fire crackling in the cold night air and the laughter of family members filled the space. Geraldine was playing near the edge of the forest, just a few steps away from the fire. No one could have predicted that, in a moment, tragedy was about to strike. Suddenly, a strange voice called out from within the forest. The sound was so odd that it made everyone in the family turn their heads towards the source. The voice didn't sound human, but it carried a mysterious allure. Geraldine, without knowing why, stopped and stared into the forest's edge. It was as if she was hypnotized by the voice. Before her family could realize what was happening, Geraldine slowly walked into the darkness and vanished right before their eyes. The family ran after her, calling her name, but all they were met with was the eerie silence of the forest. Geraldine was gone, no sound, no trace. Something had pulled her into the darkness, something not of this world. The entire village awoke in panic, and within an hour a rescue team was formed. Flashlights illuminated the forest as dozens of villagers scoured the area, calling Geraldine's name in vain. But the thick, shadowy forest, like a living creature, swallowed every beam of light and sound, returning only a deathly silence. What was strange was that even though the area where Geraldine disappeared was close to the house and had no complex terrain, no one found any trace of her. There were no footprints, no broken branches, no sign that Geraldine had ever passed through that part of the forest. It was as though the darkness had swallowed her whole, leaving no evidence of her presence. For 3 days, the search continued in vain. The searchers recounted feeling as though an invisible presence was watching them from the forest's shadows. Strange sounds, soft whispers, like wind rustling through the trees, could be heard from afar, but when they tried to follow the sound, it would suddenly vanish. Could that have been the voice that had lured Geraldine? On the 4th day, when all hope seemed lost, a strange miracle happened. Geraldine was found, but miles away from where she had disappeared, deep within the forest, in a place no one thought a 5-year-old girl could reach on her own. What astonished everyone was that Geraldine showed no signs of exhaustion or hunger, and her clothes were completely clean, without a speck of dirt, despite it having rained heavily the previous night. She was found in a dazed state, unable to explain what had happened. When asked where she had been and what she had done during the 3 days she was missing, Geraldine just shook her head, her eyes filled with fear. She couldn't remember anything, unable to say how she had ended up there. Her mind seemed clouded, as though her memories had been wiped away by an unnatural force. When doctors examined Geraldine, they made a shocking discovery. On her body were small, precise cuts, as though someone had performed a delicate procedure on her. These cuts were so tiny and painless, but they could not be explained by any natural cause. Who or what had made these cuts? And why had they appeared after she went missing? Theories about Geraldine being abducted by a supernatural entity or even aliens began to surface. UFO researchers became interested in the case, with some believing that she had been taken for experiments and released only after they were completed. What really happened to Geraldine? Had she been the victim of an invisible entity lurking in the forest? Or had she encountered extraterrestrial beings? After the incident, many in the village started avoiding the forest. Those who had been part of Geraldine's search party claimed that they continued to hear haunting calls from within the forest, much like the one Geraldine had heard before she disappeared. Those sounds never ceased, as if something was still lurking in the darkness, waiting for its next victim. Geraldine Huggins' disappearance remains a mystery to this day. What truly happened during those 3 days? Was she taken by a supernatural force or aliens, only to be returned after being manipulated? What were the cuts on her body, and why could she not remember anything from the time she was missing? Geraldine's story not only terrified the residents of her small village, but also haunted the searchers for years afterward. The forest where she disappeared was never the same again. It carried a dark power, an invisible force that no one dared to challenge. Geraldine returned, but the truth of what happened during those horrifying 3 days remains forever buried in the shadows of the deep, dark forest. On a cold autumn night in 1967, in a small remote village in northern British Columbia, Geraldine Huggins, a 5-year-old girl, mysteriously disappeared right before her family's eyes. That evening, Geraldine and her family were having a small picnic outside their log cabin, nestled next to a dense forest. Everything was peaceful. The fire crackling in the cold night air and the laughter of family members filled the space. Geraldine was playing near the edge of the forest, just a few steps away from the fire. No one could have predicted that, in a moment, tragedy was about to strike. Suddenly, a strange voice called out from within the forest. The sound was so odd that it made everyone in the family turn their heads towards the source. The voice didn't sound human, but it carried a mysterious allure. Geraldine, without knowing why, stopped and stared into the forest's edge. It was as if she was hypnotized by the voice. Before her family could realize what was happening, Geraldine slowly walked into the darkness and vanished right before their eyes. The family ran after her, calling her name, but all they were met with was the eerie silence of the forest. Geraldine was gone. No sound, no trace. Something had pulled her into the darkness, something not of this world. The entire village awoke in panic, and within an hour, a rescue team was formed. Flashlights illuminated the forest as dozens of villagers scoured the area, calling Geraldine's name in vain. But the thick, shadowy forest, like a living creature, swallowed every beam of light and sound, returning only a deathly silence. What was strange was that even though the area where Geraldine disappeared was close to the house and had no complex terrain, no one found any trace of her. There were no footprints, no broken branches, no sign that Geraldine had ever passed through that part of the forest. It was as though the darkness had swallowed her whole, leaving no evidence of her presence. For 3 days, the search continued in vain. The searchers recounted feeling as though an invisible presence was watching them from the forest's shadows. Strange sounds, soft whispers, like wind rustling through the trees, could be heard from afar, but when they tried to follow the sound, it would suddenly vanish. Could that have been the voice that had lured Geraldine? On the 4th day, when all hope seemed lost, a strange miracle happened. Geraldine was found, but miles away from where she had disappeared, deep within the forest, in a place no one thought a 5-year-old girl could reach on her own. What astonished everyone was that Geraldine showed no signs of exhaustion or hunger, and her clothes were completely clean, without a speck of dirt, despite it having rained heavily the previous night. She was found in a dazed state, unable to explain what had happened. When asked where she had been and what she had done during the 3 days she was missing, Geraldine just shook her head, her eyes filled with fear. She couldn't remember anything, unable to say how she had ended up there. Her mind seemed clouded, as though her memories had been wiped away by an unnatural force. When doctors examined Geraldine, they made a shocking discovery. On her body were small, precise cuts, as though someone had performed a delicate procedure on her. These cuts were so tiny and painless, but they could not be explained by any natural cause. Who or what had made these cuts, and why had they appeared after she went missing? Theories about Geraldine being abducted by a supernatural entity or even aliens began to surface. UFO researchers became interested in the case, with some believing that she had been taken for experiments and released only after they were completed. What really happened to Geraldine? Had she been the victim of an invisible entity lurking in the forest, or had she encountered extraterrestrial beings? After the incident, many in the village started avoiding the forest. Those who had been part of Geraldine's search party claimed that they continued to hear haunting calls from within the forest, much like the one Geraldine had heard before she disappeared. Those sounds never ceased, as if something was still lurking in the darkness, waiting for its next victim. Geraldine Huggins' disappearance remains a mystery to this day. What truly happened during those 3 days? Was she taken by a supernatural force or aliens, only to be returned after being manipulated? What were the cuts on her body, and why could she not remember anything from the time she was missing? Geraldine's story not only terrified the residents of her small village, but also haunted the searchers for years afterward. The forest where she disappeared was never the same again. It carried a dark power, an invisible force that no one dared to challenge. Geraldine returned, but the truth of what happened during those horrifying 3 days remains forever buried in the shadows of the deep, dark forest. All these disappearances are merely a small piece of a much larger, mysterious puzzle. Each case shares eerie similarities. The victims often disappear near bodies of water, sudden weather changes occur, and they frequently leave no trace. This mystery is far beyond human comprehension. Could it be that nature itself or some other force is orchestrating these vanishings? These stories are not just simple disappearances. They are reminders of the existence of mysteries that humanity has yet to fully understand. Do we dare continue exploring these phenomena, or will we remain consumed by the fear of screams from the darkness? Throughout his years of investigating hundreds of bizarre disappearances, David Paulides noticed one particularly striking trend. Children often make up a significant portion of the victims, especially among indigenous communities and in areas with connections to spiritual or religious significance. This recurring pattern is too significant to ignore and has given rise to various theories about an invisible force manipulating these incidents. Paulides emphasized that, in many cases, children from indigenous communities often fall victim to these unsolved disappearances. Why are children such easy targets? Could it be that the areas where these communities live are surrounded by supernatural forces or the spirits of ancestors? In some indigenous beliefs, nature and spirits play a crucial role, and certain lands are considered sacred, where no one is permitted to trespass. There are instances where children disappear while playing outdoors, near dense forests or sacred lakes, but never return. No trace, no evidence of animal attacks or accidents. Strangely, no one hears any cries for help, nor is there any sign of a struggle or panic. One notable example is the case of a 4-year-old girl who went missing in a forest near an indigenous village. The entire village searched for days but found no sign of the child. The villagers believed she had been taken by a supernatural entity. Even the village elders performed ceremonies to pray to the spirits of the ancestors in hopes of finding the child, but all efforts were in vain. What really happened? Why do these disappearances often occur in areas connected to the spiritual or religious beliefs of the community? In his investigations, Paulides also found puzzling details related to animal tracks. In some cases, animal footprints or traces of predators were found near the scene, but there was no indication that the victim had been attacked. Why? Were these animals merely coincidental, or were they part of something more mysterious? For example, some disappearances occurred near old-growth forests where wolf or bear tracks were found near the victim's last known location. But these tracks never led to a clear conclusion. No bodies were ever found, and there was no evidence of a struggle or fight. This raises a critical question. What is really taking these children? Paulides also noted that in many of these cases, there were reports of strange sounds, unusual calls from a distance, as if something was luring the children deeper into the forest. Could these sounds be the reason for the disappearances? Are the victims being hypnotized by some invisible force? As Paulides examined hundreds of disappearances with inexplicable details and events, he began to propose theories that extended beyond the scope of traditional science. He realized that many elements of these cases could be linked to supernatural phenomena or extraterrestrial involvement. Theories that, while difficult to believe, might be the only way to explain the victims' mysterious disappearances. Paulides began to observe that some of these disappearances seemed to involve supernatural entities. In many cases, victims were found under bizarre conditions. Their clothes were inexplicably removed, their bodies were unharmed, but placed in locations impossible to reach by conventional means. This led Paulides to wonder, is there a supernatural force kidnapping these individuals? The cases where victims are found after being missing in unusual circumstances, such as not being bitten by insects or showing no signs of fatigue despite having been gone for days, further support the theory of supernatural intervention. Could it be that these victims were held by an entity beyond our understanding, only to be released once it had fulfilled its purpose? Paulides also observed that in many disappearances, strange lights appeared in the sky or near the location where the victim vanished. These lights, often described as glowing orbs or unexplained beams, were reported by numerous witnesses. Could these lights be related to the abduction of the victims? One of the most controversial yet intriguing theories is the hypothesis involving alien intervention. Paulides has studied many cases where strange phenomena, such as lights in the sky, disappearances without a trace, and the victim's reappearance in inexplicable locations, led him to suspect that aliens might be involved in these events. In some cases, the traces left by the victims defy normal logic. For instance, there are cases where victims were found on mountaintops, miles away from where they disappeared, even though the terrain would have made it impossible for them to have climbed there on their own. What transported them there? Could it be that they were taken by technology or entities from beyond Earth? While these signs may seem hard to believe, they may be the only explanation for certain events that cannot be understood through traditional scientific methods. Paulides doesn't claim with certainty that aliens are involved, but he raises the question, do we truly understand everything that's happening around us? The theories Paulides presents not only spark controversy, but also open up a mysterious perspective on how these victims vanish. Could these individuals have been abducted by supernatural or extraterrestrial entities? This might sound far-fetched, but for cases with no trace left behind, strange lights and victims reappearing in bizarre conditions, the supernatural and alien hypothesis cannot be dismissed. Paulides emphasizes that not everything can be explained by science. There are phenomena that go beyond human comprehension, and these mysterious disappearances are just the tip of a much larger mystery. While these mysteries may evoke curiosity and fascination in readers, Paulides doesn't forget to highlight the importance of caution and safety measures when going on outdoor trips or exploring wilderness areas. Disappearance can happen at any time, and regardless of the cause, being prepared is crucial. He urges everyone to always follow basic safety precautions, such as never going alone, always carrying tracking devices, and keeping in regular contact with loved ones. In the end, the mystery of the disappearances in wilderness areas remains unsolved. What really happened to the victims? Why do so many people vanish without a trace? And why have regions like Canada become hotspots for these disappearances? These questions remain unanswered, hanging in the shadows, awaiting an explanation that perhaps will never be found. Paulides concludes with a reminder. The natural world holds many things we do not yet understand. These disappearances are just a small part of a much larger mystery, and we have only just scratched the surface. Should we stop here or continue to search for the truth in the darkness?